Last weekend, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg laid out his four-point plan calling for global regulation of the internet. Now, among the responses to his op-ed, one government official voiced his opposition, FCC Commissioner Carr. He tweeted, "Facebook says it's taking heat for the mistakes it makes in moderating content, so it calls for the government to police our speech for it. Outsourcing censorship to the government is not just a bad idea, it would violate the First Amendment. I'm a no." Commissioner Carr joins us now from Washington. Break it down for us, Mr. Carr, exactly what your problem is.
Yeah, so as you pointed out, I think in the earlier segment, Facebook has been under pressure for a lot of missteps recently. One area in particular has been the mistakes that it's been making with respect to moderating online content, with the decisions that it chooses to make about what can be said on its platform. And I think calling in the government as a response to that pressure and asking the government to police our online speech for it, that's just not a bad idea. That's a violation of the First Amendment.
But interestingly, in some ways, there's this tension, particularly within the party that you come from, Republican. Ted Cruz, in many ways, wants to see more regulation of Facebook, doesn't like, in some ways, wants these companies to be held accountable. But then on the other side of it, there's some calls and concerns from Republican lawmakers that there's some bias built into social media companies such as Facebook. How do you think regulation should or shouldn't, therefore, be enacted in general?
Well, I think the regulation that Facebook is calling for in this circumstance, it's not asking for help policing either illegal content or to go after unlawful activity. What it says in this op-ed is that the government should step in and start regulating what it calls harmful content. Now, how do you define harmful content? Well, Facebook wants politicians to step in and start making those decisions. And you can think around the world, there's plenty of government regimes that would accept the invitation to silence political speech, to shut down ideas that they don't like based on the mantle of it being harmful content.
I see. So there's an element that the free speech I can see is something that you're concerned about protecting. However, should Facebook in general be regulated? Should there be some form of regulation for the other areas of content that Facebook's looking at in respect of looking across the pond to GDPR in Europe?
Well, I think it's interesting that Facebook waited until after it obtained a dominant position, until after it was about $500 billion in market cap, to start calling for heavy-handed government regulation, whether on the speech front or on the GDPR front, as you pointed out. In my time as a regulator in D.C., I can tell you large corporations don't call for greater government control as an act of charity. It makes it that much harder for competitors and for startups to compete in the space. Heavy-handed regulation sets up an economic moat and can be used to protect business models. I think we always want to see more competition.
Okay, so how can you foster that without regulation coming from the government?
Well, government regulation only makes it more difficult for competitors to enter this space. There's all kinds of actions that Facebook could take with its algorithms and otherwise to act in a neutral manner, an unbiased manner, if the goal here is to get at unlawful activity. One of the things that was called for, though, in this piece was for the government to start regulating what Zuckerberg called divisive political speech. And he cited in particular speech on issues like immigration. And I think we have a long tradition in this country of wanting to foster discussions on hot-button issues and not have the government step in and shut it down. So I think it's this marriage of big tech and big government that presents a pretty scary outlook if we were to go down that path.
What then about, from the other side of the aisle, has been discussed, as I mentioned, Ted Cruz in some ways agreeing with Elizabeth Warren about breaking up such large companies. You have said previously that, you know, now Facebook has reached such a scale, some would call it an oligopoly in some way, maybe a monopoly. But what would you say, do these companies need to start to be looked at and split up, or is that something you're against?
Well, I've seen calls from people like Senator Warren that are looking to break up big tech, and that's not what I'm advocating for. I think in a lot of ways this is a reaction to those calls in its attempt to distract, whether it's just to pass the buck generally or to move attention off of those calls to break up big tech. But my main position is we shouldn't be sacrificing the First Amendment or offering it up to the government as tribute to distract from calls for broader reform.
There is an element, though, that harmful content is just one element of regulation that Mark Zuckerberg was talking about. He had three other key proposals: election integrity, privacy, data portability. The suggestions he had there, how did you react to them?
Yeah, not very favorably. So you take the one on elections. One of the ideas he had there was that there's this very narrow category of speech that Americans have been willing to accept heavy regulation on, which is campaign ads right around an election. And the idea that he put forward is that instead of limiting that regulation to campaign ads, we should extend that heavy-handed regulation to discussions of all hot-button issues outside of campaigns. I think that's a very dangerous precedent. We want to be encouraging discussion about immigration and other hot-button issues that the proposal would subject to government regulation. And
going forward, is there anywhere that you could see any changes done internally by Facebook that you don't think needs regulation, that could aid the way in which we see harmful content reach the public discourse? Like, how would you like the company to self-regulate if you don't want to see overall regulation being enforced by government?
Yeah, I think Facebook can fix Facebook. We don't need to get the government involved and to start stepping on First Amendment rights to do it. I think there's a lot of neutral, unbiased steps that can be taken to get there. My point is we simply don't need to bring the government in and have it start regulating online content as a way to solve whatever problems Facebook thinks it's facing.